Good morning, everyone. Hope you're all having a wonderful day today. Today, we're going to be taking a look at a very interesting optic. This is the Vector Continental 1-6x24. Now, what makes this optic particularly special is that this being the Vector Continental line, is that it is using German glass in a Chinese body. Now, getting into what makes the Continental 1-6 fiber dot a very interesting optic in the LPVO game, especially in the budget LPVO game, is that this is an optic that has a retail price of, I believe, $450, a little bit lower with certain discount codes that are floating around, but it is a very inexpensive scope utilizing a German optical system. And their Continental line, whether it be LPVOs or higher power magnification scopes as well, are all using the German optical solutions in a Chinese body. Now, the body that we're going with, this is a 60-61 30mm main tube, very standard. Size and weight is actually very good. It is a little bit of a long optic at 11 inches, but it is fairly lightweight, coming in at 18 ounces flat, which anything sub 20 ounces is pretty good for an LPVO. 16, 17, 18, somewhere in that range is on the very light end for LPVOs. There might be a couple out there that are lighter, but not very many. Now, as far as controls on the optic go, it's very simple. At the back, we have a diopter for adjusting the reticle to your eyes. Everybody's eyes are a little bit different. We have a magnification ring. This one here is the version without the throw lever, though they do include a throw lever in some of their other bundles. This one here, they just shipped it to me without the throw lever. Not a big deal. Now, as far as the turrets go, this is a exposed windage and elevation. However, they are locked. So when they are in the down position, they are locked. And as we'll get into later on, they do retain their position even during extremely harsh drops. Now, to adjust them, you simply lift up and then you can adjust. Now, the rest of the body is 60-61 T6 aluminum. All that is perfectly fine. The adjustments, however, these are 70-75, which is about double the strength to weight ratio. So because they are exposed, they are locked, but they are again exposed turrets, they are about twice the strength of the rest of the body and have held up fairly well. As far as the clicks themselves go, they are in 0.1 mil increments because this is in a mil optic. The reticle, the actual hash marks in the optic itself are in mil, and you're working in 0.1 mil increments, which is more than precise enough for a 1-6 LPVO. Now, on the left-hand side of the optic, we have our illumination, which has 6 different settings and a off between each one. And it is nice to have an off setting in between, as you don't have to cycle from 0 to 11 to get to your desired brightness level. You simply store it one click away from where you want it. Now, this being a fiber wire reticle, a fiber dot reticle, whatever you guys want to call it, it gets extremely bright and is truly daylight bright. So basically what's going on is you have a long, thin fiber optic tube inside of the optic itself. You then have a LED emitter that then shines on that, and it appears very, very bright. Traditional LED illumination is usually at best daylight tinted. Some of them do get pretty bright, but fiber optic illumination gets truly red dot bright, truly a daylight bright, more than bright enough for just about any circumstance possible. And fortunately, the Continental 1-6 fiber dot is no different. So at setting 6, it is more than daylight bright, certainly more than bright enough for anything indoors, and will bloom out a little bit. Now, the difference with a fiber optic reticle versus a LED emitter in like a red dot is that even at a much higher brightness level than you need, it's not going to bloom out anywhere near as bad, and usually it's also quite a bit more precise, generally giving you the best of both worlds, versus a red dot may not look as good to certain people in certain circumstances, but a fiber optic reticle will always look very crisp, very precise, and allowing you to pick it up very, very quickly, which is going to be the biggest advantage of it, and something that I personally like, and I know a lot of other people do as well. Now, if you're somebody who doesn't need that sort of thing, doesn't like that sort of thing, you're fine with traditional reticles, horseshoes, any other reticle that might be out there on the market that doesn't utilize fiber optic technology, then that's perfectly fine. You're probably not going to need this optic, as that is going to be one of the main selling point of optics like this. Now, fortunately, that's not the only good thing about this optic, and it actually does have a lot of other things going for it as well. Now, we've already talked about size and weight. It's a little bit long at 11 inches, but a fairly trim weight at 18 ounces. Pretty good for an LPVO anyways. Getting into usability, the eye relief and eye box, they rate a constant 4-inch eye relief. Now, I will tell you at 1X, it is extremely forgiving, both forward and back, as well as up, down, left, and right. So you probably have anywhere from 2.5 to 6 inches of usable eye relief at 1X, as well as a decent amount of off-axis availability, being able to look through the optic. Not as good as a red dot, an EOTech, anything out there is still going to be better than an LPVO, but for an LPVO, even some of the very good LPVOs on the market, this holds up very well. Now, moving from there, our field of view is rated at a astounding 124.5 feet. My scale is anything above 100 is good. Basically, to get in the ballpark, you need to at least be at 100 feet field of view at 100 yards. 110 and up is very good, and 120 feet up is top tier phenomenal. This again at 124.5, meaning that you get an immense field of view at 1X, but that also translates all the way up to magnification, all the way up to 6X magnification, meaning that you get a ton of information. Now, with that German glass that we mentioned earlier, the quality of the information that you're getting is also very good. Now, I have a couple other optics here to compare and contrast again, and I hopefully am rolling in the B-roll of that now. So, of course, starting out with the Vector Continental 1-6, it is a very pleasurable viewing experience. At 1X, you again have an immense field of view. You can see quite a bit, and with that German glass, it looks very good. Now, to compare and contrast to another very good optic, if a little bit overpriced, this is the Steiner P4XI, which is also using German glass, now only in the 1:4 magnification range. Very similar field of view, size, and weight. It actually is about an inch shorter and about an ounce lighter, so very, very good in that regard, but it is also using German glass and a fiber optic illumination system. And at 1X, they look very similar, though I will note that the Vector Continental is even more forgiving at 1X than the Steiner P4XI. Now, at max magnification, the Steiner still looks great. It has very good contrast, colors, brightness, all of that sort of stuff, but it tops out at 4X magnification, whereas the Vector Continental goes all the way up to 6 and also still retains a very, very pleasing image. Now, if I were to say which one of these German optics looks better, to my eyes, they are almost identical. Now, if you're just a true glass snob that spends a lot of time looking through top-tier glass, you might be able to pick up a bigger difference than I did, but they both looked very similar. The biggest difference is that the Continental has an extra couple magnification, or about 50% more on the top end. Now, moving into the other two scopes that I have on hand, probably the closest competition for the Continental is going to be the highly reviewed Primary Arms Nova. Now, the reason why the Nova could still be a good alternative to some people is that it's about $100 cheaper, so if you're on a super tight budget, that $100 could be the difference in being able to afford it versus not being able to afford it. Now, the Primary Arms Nova has a comparable field of view. The glass quality is decent, the 1X looks good, but when you compare them side by side, the Continental with its, non-Chinese glass just looks much better. Now, when we move up the magnification range to 6X, this is where the Primary Arms Nova does fall a little bit behind, as the optical degradation at higher magnifications are a little bit more noticeable, and it's also a little bit less forgiving in terms of its eye relief and eye box. Still a very, very usable optic, has great illumination. What's funny is both of the Chinese fiber optic scopes that I have here are actually brighter in terms of just raw illumination. All of the scopes get more than bright enough, but the Vector 1-10, this is the Constantine, which is Chinese fiber optic, and then the Primary Arms Nova, which is also a Chinese fiber optic scope. Both of these get brighter for some reason. I'm not sure if that just has to do with the Chinese emitters that are in here or whatnot, but they do get brighter, but it's kind of a distinction without a difference, as you don't really need that additional brightness. Both the Vector Continental and the Steiner P4XI both get more than bright enough for basically any scenario possible. Now, the last optic to look at, this is just something I thought I'd throw in. This is actually a 1-10 Vector Constantine. So the Constantine line is the straight up Chinese line, so Chinese optical solutions, and of course the fiber optic illumination as well. And the 1X is fine. It definitely has the worst 1x performance, the worst field of view, the worst eye relief out of the bunch. It does have 10x magnification. However, as you guys can probably see, it was very difficult to get that 10x footage, as the 10x is very, very tight, and 10x doesn't really make sense for me personally when it comes to just a simple duplex reticle with, again, that center fiber optic illumination. It's interesting in concept because, again, you do get 10x magnification with it, but it's not really all that usable on the high end. So again, the Vector Continental is extremely easy to use at 1x, very, very forgiving on the low end, retains a good level of usability at the high end as well. LPVOs in general do tend to suffer a little bit in terms of usability if you're going to be using them at their maximum magnification. They're just, again, they're kind of emphasized on the lower end of things, hence the low power variable optics. However, again, extremely usable, very, very good glass quality, true daylight bright illumination, very good at just about everything that it does. But before we talk about durability and wrap this up, we should at least bring up the rest of the reticle. Now, this being a fiber optic illumination reticle, it is actually a wire reticle, not a etched reticle, and it's very difficult to combine those two things together. I believe Primary Arms is going to be bringing out either a GLX or a PLX optic, which is, of course, their higher end optics, that is going to be combining a fiber optic illumination system with a etched reticle, either a first focal plane or a second focal plane etched reticle. So it's going to have kind of a dual system inside. Very complicated and very expensive. However, the rest of the reticle in the Vector Continental 1-6 is a very simple mil hash. You have 6 mil hashes out to, of course, 6 mils with about a half mil of windage. 6 mils on a 5.56 will get you out to 600, 650 yards, depending on barrel length, ammunition type, so on and so forth. But again, for an LPVO that's definitely prioritizing the 0 to 400 yard window, I think that the reticle is usable if extremely simple and nothing special. Now, getting into durability, something that I should mention on this particular optic is the mount that we're using is the Primary Arms PLX mount. The mount by itself is about $300, which it's a very nice mount, all the stuff that goes into it, very nice material, so on and so forth. It's a little bit too expensive. It's not all that great as far as mounts go. I mean, it is great as far as mounts goes, but it's probably just not worth $300, at least in my opinion. On top of that, we also have the RMR adapter plate for the front ring on here. I believe the retail on this is like $75 to $100. Also, it's nice, but it's just too expensive for what it is, and it actually came loose on the drop test. Now, it should be noted that I did not have the Viridian RFX45 during the drop test because that would have most certainly protected the optic, and I didn't want to do that. So we took the top-mounted green dot, in this case, off for the drop test, so that did not interfere in the drops whatsoever. So, if you're familiar with my drop system, we, of course, do a 5-round control group at 50 yards just to see where we're hitting, and then, of course, compare and contrast after the drops. Now, after the first drop onto dirt and rocks, the optic was perfectly fine. However, there was a little bit of a shift in zero of about 1.5 inches, so think about 3 MOA. Now, I do check the optic and mount between drops just to make sure that nothing has come loose, and I didn't notice anything come loose during the first drop. However, during the second drop, which is shoulder height directly onto an AR500 steel plate, a basically unreasonable drop, but it is just basically the hardest drop possible in a normal-ish set of circumstances, and the optic actually rotated in the mount about 30 degrees. Now, it didn't bend or anything like that, but it did rotate. And upon a little bit further inspection, the front ring, the RMR adapter, had come loose. Now, when I installed it to the proper 25 inch-pounds of torque using a Wheeler fat wrench, but throughout the course of fire, over probably about 1,000 rounds on different guns, it just happened to come a little bit loose, and I didn't notice it, but that's bad on me for not using blue Loctite. However, after, again, the scope was perfectly fine, no issues with the scope, no bending, no damage, no crack to the glass, anything like that, so it did survive the drop, and only had about 2 MOA point of impact shift. Now, the drop onto the AR500 steel plate is usually a pass-fail test for a lot of LPVOs and magnified scopes in general. They tend to do very, very poorly, if not straight up die during the double drop test, especially again the second half. The primary arms Nova that I tested and reviewed very positively several months ago, that optic died during the second half of the drop test. This optic did have a little bit of shift in zero at each point, again about 3 MOA during the first shoulder height drop and about 2 MOA on the second drop, which I can almost assuredly attribute to the front ring being loose and the optic actually shifting or rotating about 30 degrees in the rings themselves. However, I can still say that that is one of the better results that I've ever gotten with an LPVO. Again, just about every LPVO that I test either has some sort of massive point of impact shift without dying or has a large point of impact shift and dies. This one here had a moderate point of impact shift during both drops, but it did survive and it is fully functional. The top turret did take the full force of the impact, but it's still working perfectly fine, and now it's not zeroed anymore because I forget where it was at. So even though the performance wasn't perfect during the double drop test, it did in fact survive, which is better than about 75% of optics out there. Now, wrapping all of that up together, what we have is an optic that costs about $450 using German glass, which is probably the cheapest German glass optic on the market, especially as far as like an LPVO is concerned. Correct me if I'm wrong in the comments down below. 1-6x magnification, perfect for anything inside of 0 to 400 yards, and can be used out to 500 and 600 yards in a pinch if you need to. Extremely usable. You have 124 feet field of view, which is fantastic. Really high quality German glass, looks great. True daylight bright illumination, and again, very good eye relief, eye box, all of that sort of stuff. And comboing that with a relatively low cost for the features and the glass quality that you're getting out of it, it is a very, very interesting option. And if you're looking for a 1-to-6 fiber optic scope in the sub $500 range, it's really going to come down to your brand loyalties and preferences, and depending on what company you like to work with. Now, all of that sort of stuff, that's not my deal. That's for you guys to determine for yourselves. What I can say is comparing this between something like the primary arms Nova, which again I reviewed very well. I like it a lot. You can find those on sale occasionally for sub $300. And that is a very, very good price to performance ratio. Fantastic, basically unbeatable. This optic is better, but it's also more expensive. Now, with this optic out on the market, there's no reason to buy a Vortex PST Gen 2, as this has better features, better glass quality, and is 6 ounces lighter. Not 6 ounces lighter, I think it's like 4.5 ounces lighter, and is also cheaper to boot. So there was an argument between the primary arms Nova and the Vortex Viper PST, but now that there's a lighter, cheaper, better optic on the market in total than the Vortex Viper PST Gen 2, there's really no reason to own one of those anymore. Now, the primary arms Nova definitely still has a place in the market because it is, again, cheaper. It's about $100, $250 cheaper. So for those people on a very tight budget, which I usually end up being one of those people, it's still a very attractive option, again, given its very good price to performance, which is in fact why this is my personal primary arms Nova, as the first one that I had broke, but I liked it so much that I personally bought a second one. But at the end of the day, it's really going to come down to what you're looking for in an optic and what fits your specific circumstances. For instance, if you don't need that fiber wire illumination in your optic, then buying something like this, even if it has, good glass quality, very usable, pretty good price to performance, then it's still not going to make sense for you if you don't need that reticle, because probably about 50% of the equation is going to be that reticle. If you want something that's just going to excel up close in that 0 to 400 yard window, this does very good in that regard. But if you want something that's maybe a little bit more versatile with a more fully featured reticle, auto ranging features, so on and so forth, then there are, of course, other optics that will do that better. As far as fiber wire illumination optics go, this might be the best that I've seen so far and what I would recommend in, again, that sub $500 category. But again, that's going to depend on what you actually need. Now, when it comes to me, I am definitely biased, as I like using LPVOs in general, and I'm a big fan of fiber optic illumination systems. So for me personally, I'm kind of a sucker for this sort of thing. But at the end of the day, let me know what you guys think of the Vector Continental 1-6, if there's any other optics that I should compare and contrast again, or anything else out there that I should take a look at. But with all that out of the way, guys, I do want to say thank you so much for watching. I hope you all enjoyed. I will see you in the next one. Peace off.